Good evening. Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to another edition of Searls After Dark, the second of two editions so far. I'm your host for this week, Justin Searls. This week, who knows? Next week, that's another story. We haven't ironed out my contract just yet. You're joining because this is a series where we're building an application. The application's purpose is to use OpenAI's API to to simulate a chat in Japanese language for the purpose of practice. And so all the UI Chrome that we build and all the other kind of supplementary features will be designed to help us learn Japanese language. Translation, grammar improvement, some way to get this into, another system maybe that we use to memorize words and so forth, or grammar patterns. So that's what we're here for. Last week, we explored the cone of uncertainty. We went after the most uncertain thing first, which is, can we use this API, which does not yet support chat per se, and prove out those three things: translation, grammar improvement, and chat-like interface? And the answer was yes. So we did the one risky thing. We proved that out. That means that if we build an application, it's not wasted. So today we're going to move to the next most priority way to approach prioritizing a backlog, and that is, outside in. Let's start building the application as if we were using it, and just going byte by byte by byte, move forward just an inch at a time. Goal being to build the absolute leanest, thinnest thread. Some people call it a thin vertical slice through the application to get some kind of value out of it. Now, if you're asking well, what's the first thing you build in a chat application? It's probably not anything more complicated than have one chat, because each chat has lots of messages. They pile up. You don't need to manage multiple chats or name or anything like that. So let's get started down that path. Let's see. Any orders of business? Oh, big news for me personally. I have announced my first new job since founding TestDouble in 2011. So here we are 12 years later. My new title is meta programmer, meaning I think about programming and then I talk about meta concepts in addition to programming itself, but it was mostly me extracting stuff that I learned. If I'm any good at YouTube's yet, in some angle, some corner, there will be a YouTube card that'll let you click straight to that video. I did a little 9-minute announcement video that is not like this one, because that one is full of stock video, and actually, even though you get 4 of my face in the thumbnail, you get 0 of my face in the video. I just want to set expectations right up front. Just a quick follow-up. OpenAI's API page is currently a 404. I clicked on the API link and nothing came back. And I suspect it has something to do with the fact that in the intervening 7 nights between first taping and this taping, they have released a chat completions API. So not to say that last week was a waste of time, but we're going to throw all that out because it's a total waste of time. Thanks for joining. I have made no promises to you in terms of what we're here for. We are here for the journey, not the destination. Just drinking a little bit of water here. I'm working up some courage. Right. To introduce this week's beverage of the week, it is a whiskey called Kaiyo whiskey. This is it's aged in Mizunara oak barrels, which are kind of hard to work with oak, but made famous by Japanese whiskey. Kaiyo means ocean, and Kai means ocean, and Yo means west. It's a Western ocean, and the funny thing about this is west meaning like the West, like America is part of the West or Europe is part of the West. My understanding is this is like a whiskey person from the UK who went to Japan, got the Mizunara oak, got the Japanese sourced water, and then actually ages this because like whiskey regulations are kind of strict in Japan. And let's pop that. Ages it on boats, so uses the salty sea air. And it's a short aging process of just a few months. And that is some whiskey on a rock. And there we go. It's company tonight while we work through this. Also, this is a branded mug cup. DN Simple, our favorite DNS provider. They're friends of the show. Anthony and Letitia Eden run the company, and they're a really fantastic. I should go to their website. DN Simple. OpenAI has yet to respond to any of my sponsor requests, and these are all websites that we have. So there we go. I didn't expect to be logged in. I hope I didn't show anything too private, but they host our websites, our domains. Good enough. The other side of this is Madison Ruby. I think it was 2011, 2012. Yeah, that conference. There was a whiskey tasting. It was a good time. Let's get back to it. All right. I'll try it later. All right. Kaiyo whiskey, not a sponsor of the show just yet. All right, but we're not going to do that today. We're instead going to focus on another aspect of building a Rails application. We are going to open up our code editor, and we're going to think about like working outside in. Now that we know this will theoretically work, it can only get easier if they've got a chat API. Let's work outside in, and the Rails applications have many different ways that you can contact the outside world. You could talk to Redis using Action Cable. You could talk to Redis using Action Job to then queue up work that then another process picks up off of a Redis queue. It's different ports, different kind of server. You could talk with Action Mailer. You can send stuff over SMTP using some tool that knows SMTP, like you use like a SendGrid. SendGrid over the API or over SMTP and so forth. You have Action Mailbox, which I think can speak IMAP or SMTP, but I don't know. That's for receiving mail. So there's lots of it's a permeable membrane, a Rails application. But when we think of like what's the foundational thing, every Rails app typically starts with an HTTP API, and maybe the API just responds with, hey, I send a GET request to this route, and then it just returns an HTML page, right? The HTML page is just constructed based on inputs and outputs and whatnot. That's an API just like anything else. It just happens to be read by a browser. You could do a JSON API, of course. But like everything else that we layer on top, like an Action Cable or a turbo stream where we're putting HTML over the wire and that's happening over sockets, WebSockets, that's all kind of progressive enhancement on top. So at the end of the day, a Rails application, if you're working outside in, you're typically going to start by building a feature by creating some routes, HTTP routes, that your application will know how to respond to. So that's where we're going to start. Except starting the server is the way that we're going to get the feedback. And starting the server is like no longer as obvious as it used to be. So back in the olden days of not that long ago, you could run bin Rails server, or maybe you're more familiar with bundle exec Rails server to run Rails in the context of your gem files bundle of gems so you get all the right versions of everything. Well, bin Rails is just a little bit faster than saying bundle. And you can also say bin Rails S, right? Lots of ways to start a server. No right way, but there are some more convenient ways. If you're doing the newfangled stuff that we set up earlier this week, so we look in our package.json, we've got, and look in our gem file as well. And another piece of forensic evidence in terms of how this is all set up. Get log one line, you can see Rails new chat JPN, ESBuild is the JavaScript approach, and Tailwind is CSS. So we're going to be using ESBuild to bundle our JavaScript and Tailwind's CLI to bundle our CSS. And if you look at the package JSON, there's some cues here, like how that's set up. But the way that you know that is actually yet another file is so many layers, right? Let's start outside in just in terms of how to use this thing. So bin dev is the command that Rails documentation will say, go and run your server using bin dev. If you look at what dev is in that bin directory, it's going to first install the gem Foreman. If it's not installed yet, Foreman is a tool, a little simple, very simple gem that all it does is looks at a configuration file and then spawns however many processes for whatever number of purposes and agglomerates all of those, keeps track of all of their standard output and interleaves those messages back to you while keeping all those servers running. If you've ever seen a proc file, Foreman was the kind of thing that created that meme. And we can look at that proc file. It's looking at proc file dev. This is generated now by Rails, of course. It's got three different servers in mind. It's got the web one, which is, for whatever reason, I don't know why, unsetting any environment variable named port, and then running bin Rails server. So I presume that means it's going to run on port 3000. Then it's got a yarn build watch. Spoiler alert, I kind of knew this already. That's why I was looking at the package JSON. And then yarn build CSS watch. Now those watch arguments there, that means it's going to run in some sort of continuous mode as opposed to just a one and done build the assets. So all three of these things are our web application server, our JavaScript, asset building thing, and our CSS asset building thing. All three are going to run simultaneously. If you've only ever used, sprockets and the asset pipeline there, the Rails server was actually doing that work for you, just not particularly well. And if you ever used Webpacker without running, bin Webpack dev server, then you've seen Rails kind of chug along, try to do that in a relatively inefficient way. It's really hard to imagine a modern server taking on all these responsibilities. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want the bin Rails server to actually respond to our browser requests and these things to do the building for us. You can see kind of what that's doing if you look in your package.json. Again, yarn build, if you're not a yarn person, is equivalent to npm run. It looks for a script in a package.json. So here we got build and build CSS, and here indeed we're shelling out to esbuild with some pretty, straightforward, make source maps, bundle it all together, and then we're shelling out to Tailwind CSS, which modern versions of Tailwind 3.0 and up are all running a just-in-time compiler. Just in time. Searls after dark. All right, running a JIT. JITs are hot right now, so especially in Ruby land. So we're all talking about JITs. You got YJIT, you got TenderJIT, and this thing is building out your CSS into a file called application CSS. And if you look at this application Tailwind CSS, we can open that up. You can see here, okay, so it's pulling in Tailwind base components and utilities. All right, that's all there really is to it. We're not going to worry about any of that right now. That's all just exposition. That's just icing on the cake. We're not going to write any JavaScript or CSS today, I don't think. So here we go. And you can see now Foreman is running a web server, a JS server, a CSS server, one worker for each. That's the .1 there, and it's interleaving all their messages together. Okay. I'm a command K-aholic. I just like to clear out the terminal. I don't like to see cruft. I don't like it. Okay. I also don't like, speaking of cruft, I don't like seeing crap over on the side here, so I've got a keybind here to collapse all the trees. Okay, so I've got my server running. If everything's going well, I'll be able to run localhost 3000. We didn't do a thing. We didn't create our database yet. So we're going to create a database. There's lots of ways to do this. There's lots of commands. You can run bin rake db yada yada or bin rails db yada yada. To avoid confusion about like what's a Rails command and what's a rake command, if you run one of the rake tasks with Rails, it'll just know and it'll shell out to rake. But because I'm a Ruby insider, I know that this is actually going to be a rake command. I just run rake, and it's out of habit. No wrong answers, except all the things that you can do to a computer and make things not work. Except for those are the wrong answers. There are lots of right answers. Infinitely many right answers, just fewer of them than there are wrong answers. Welcome to the show, everyone. Surprisingly flavorful for only being aged a few months. Little smoky, even, for having no peat. They've got a peated one. Knocks your socks off. You swear to God you're in the Highlands. Or Speyside. Or whichever one is the peaty one. I don't know. I'm not a whiskey expert. But I do appreciate it from time to time. Okay, so bin rake db. What do we type? db create's just going to create the database. Do nothing else. db setup is going to create the database and then load it from your schema RB file, which we don't have because we don't have any migrations. So that's either not going to work or you know what? I don't like to do it anyway. I like to control each step. I want to see what's happening. So just create the database. That's all it's doing. Create a database called JPN development, JPN tests. If you're not familiar, those came from the database YAML file, which was generated. Look at this. Is this instructions on how to use Mac ports? Mac ports is probably not in the top 10 ways people might have installed this in real world practice. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that. I'm not going to need connection pooling. I just know I'm not. Development. Usernames. I'm not going to create a development username. I just use my, by default, Postgres is just going to use your who am I. So it's going to use that as the user. I don't need all of this. So many comments. Warning, the database defined as test will be erased and regenerated from your development database at various points in your journey. That's fine. And then production. Again, this is stuff that like I never really need. And so I'd rather just not have it than have a comment that's going to be way out of date in 5 years when I come back and look at it. It's like, oh, that was a Rails 7 one and Rails 9. So keep it minimal. If this is good enough to work, this is good enough to work. Chat JPN database password can be populated by Heroku or whoever our server is, and that'll be enough for that. Okay, so that's all defined in our database YAML. I'm going to run bin rake, bin rails. I could run db migrate. What it's going to do is be like, you don't have any migrations. Migrations are files that define things in the database. We'll definitely touch on one of those today. So I mentioned that I like to work outside in. There are two kind of prevailing modes of thought about how to prioritize development work. One is to, both are ultimately full stack, right? You want to build the feature. That's what we're here to do. You could either start with, we're gonna try to use the server and hit it like the browser like a user would, and interact with the user interface in the browser like a form, and then that's gonna make us go to a route, and then make us go to a controller, which will make us render a view, and so on and so forth, all the way down to ultimately something has to happen in the database to persist these things across multiple requests, because HTTP is stateless. One approach. The other one, bottom up, and I think I might have mentioned this last week as well. You define the database, the models, you glue them together, maybe with like a headless sort of like an API or an object that like, negotiates whatever the feature logic that you want or think you want is. And then you ladder them all up, and then you kind of really hope that it just happens to align perfectly with what your UI is expecting or wants to see. And like that is, to quote a former colleague of mine, he'd walk into a room of people when they were really happy and looking forward to the future, the bold future, the software they're building. And one time he walked in, he said, "There's a lot of hope in this room. I don't like it." So whenever you're building your rebellion based on hope, you got to be mindful of the fact that software has a tricky way of throwing us off target whenever we make more than one assumption at a time. And so what I see most often, and a lot of thought leaders when I was coming of age were advocating for bottom-up design because it was so slow to test through user interfaces, that what I would often see is they would build their perfect little mind castle of what they thought the domain should be and focus on the domain. But then in reality, like the user interface would be a really awkward fit. And so then they'd spend a lot of time developing what I would probably call scar tissue to align up all of the fields and all the behavior and the functions and stuff between their kind of perfect mindset of what the data model should do with what the user interface actually needs. Much leaner, much more straightforward to just work outside in. So that's what I tend to do, even if it makes the testing story a little bit more fraught, meaning like I have to now decide like at what point do I write a test and so forth. But we're going to elide a lot of that because, as you can tell, I'm eliding a lot of details as I take 30 minutes to explain how to run a server. 18 minutes. Thank you. Totally unedited, unfiltered. Still a little bit of a filter. Got really good feedback last week from y'all. Lots of YouTube comments. Got a lot of emails. Got some people on the social were commenting. I appreciate all the comments. By the way, let's see if I can get this up on the screen. Right, there's no one to do that for me. Maybe I'll do that in post. For feedback, of course, you can leave a comment in social or whatever, but if you want to ask a question or if you want me to dive deeper into something, I'm going to monitor this. I'm going to monitor a email address just for this show. The email address is lets@playstupid.games. So if you email letsplaystupidgames, you will win stupid prizes, and I will batch up any interesting questions or use some time at the end of a show to respond to those questions and dive a little bit deeper into what you might be interested in. So it's lets@playstupid.games. I hope that's on your screen, but if it's not, the email address does work, and it will go to me. So have you forgotten what we're doing? Good. So we've created our database. We ran db migrate. There's nothing else to see here. Now what do I want to do? I want to refresh this page again. The server is still running. He said, not sure the server was still running. There it is, still running. At least I'm having fun here. I'm actually kind of nervous. All that positive feedback, I don't know. If it's just me and a camera, it's fine. But like now there's people here. Well, YouTube also shows your drop-off rate. So maybe there's not people here. Actually, I feel weirdly comforted by that. Okay, so this error, right? The reason I went over and ran my migrations, created the database, is because I knew that this error was the next thing that was broken. Jay Fields, who's a luminary, he was super effective at getting people excited about Ruby and educating them in the early days of Ruby adoption in the West. So his blog, I think, was active like 2004, 2007. That was the time frame that I came to appreciate Jay. I don't think I ever got to meet Jay in person, but he had a blog post about test-driven development. That was also all the rage at the time. And TDD is great. It's a cool tool to have in the toolbox. He said the goal in test-driven development, if you have a failing test and you're writing new code, is to either make the test pass, which is great, right? That means the code's working, or change the message. And it took me a long time to really appreciate how that framing sets you up to be having a conversation with your computer. Whether you're practicing TDD or you're doing this in browser refresh-driven development. Every little tiny step that you take, you're getting feedback from your computer. Either I changed something, I did something here, I created the database. When I refresh the page, one of three outcomes. Nothing changes. It changes in a hopefully in a productive way, or it works. So I want to go from this message to a better message, and we're going to observe this and be mindful of this. Cool. So I made it pass. I made it work. So here's Rails. Yay. I don't know why this is very buttony. I don't know what it does. I don't trust it. Not gonna press it. I kind of want to press it. Oh man, it's not like a href link. RubyOnRails.org. All right. Like new website. I guess. I don't know. All right. So we got that much running. Now we want to see a chat, I guess. What do we want to see? We want to see chats so we can engage in chats. To do that sort of thing, we are going to look at our routes. Okay, so we can define them here. I don't need that. The verb used with routes is draw for whatever reason. You're drawing your routes. It's very cute. You can define a root route. Sorry if you're British. A root. Is that what they say? I don't know what the big idea is. So we're going to say resources. This is a magical space that we're in. This is a thing called a domain-specific language, or a DSL. It is a way for you to specify your Rails configuration using... There's still methods and arguments. There's nothing magical happening, but they are set up in a way to be imperative, meaning that as I do this stuff, Rails is taking actions that's probably updating some sort of data structure in the background. But from my experience as a user of Rails, I'm feeling like, okay, I'm going to define draw my resources. A resource is an HTTP concept. So when you're posting or getting or patching or deleting using HTTP methods, the things that you're affecting are resources. And I want to define resources like chats. I want to have multiple chats. Presumably my app will have multiple chats. I also have multiple messages, and I could say resources messages. Well, there's lots of ways to do it. I could say, if I know that I'm going to draw one chat at a time and it's going to have many messages on it and not like a standalone messages, then these resource definitions, they map directly to your controllers. So I could just define like a create message here or something. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just say, do resources messages and make messages a nested resource underneath chats, because each message will only ever belong to one chat and is conceivably part of a chat. So even if we don't render a page, it seems to make sort of sense that it would be a nested resource under chats. If all this is over your head, it's totally okay, because again, we're just moving one step at a time, or in this case, 2 steps at a time. And if I refresh the page, I didn't break it, so that's good. Okay, so we're going to go to, and then for here, we want a default root path, so we're not just rendering that little hello world page. We're going to say root, and we're going to say chats index. Perfect. If we go to this now, we'll get an error. So we've forced ourselves to change the message. Uninitialized constant chats controller. We need to have something named chats controller. It expects it in a certain file location. It expects it in app controllers. So at least that's kind of guessable. And it's looking for a file named chats controller based on the name that we gave our resource and for that route. Here, I'm going to say class chats controller, and I'm going to extend from application controller. Okay. Now, when I do this, it's all I did. I made that file and I defined the thing so the constant would be defined. Now it's saying the action index couldn't be found because that was our default. That's just the get/chats. So def index, going to define that, not going to do anything else. Hit refresh. Chat's controller index is missing a template for the request format text HTML, which is the default format for new routes. So if you think of HTML as an API, it needs to know how to respond. And it can respond with a blank page. It just knows that something should be defined there because it's trying to render it. So here I've got that kind of goofy nested directory thing with VS Code again. So I'm going to right click on the views part so I can write new. And I'm going to say chats. I'm going to hit Command N. I'm going to say index.html.erb because it's really cool when files have double the extensions. I'm sure Windows loves that. So what we're saying here, file extensions work in reverse order, outside in from the right to the left, meaning that if you've got something with multiple file extensions in a Rails application, this is less relevant now that we're not using sprockets as often for asset compilation. But it means this is going to be processed as ERB, embedded Ruby, in the document. It's going to look for the little kind of like brace with percentages in them, and it's going to format and render all of that as Ruby into strings. And then after that, Rails is going to treat it as an HTML file. So index.html.erb. I could say index.html, it would work, but I know I'm going to need Ruby to do anything interesting. Hello. Refresh. And look, there's hello. Feeling good. Feeling good. We got something on the page. So what is there to do? Well, one way to think of this is like there's probably going to be multiple chats. I don't really care at the moment about there being multiple chats. I don't care about managing multiple chats. But I know that I need chats to exist. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to do something you don't normally do on a GET request, which is I'm going to potentially create a resource. Normally, you don't want to create stuff unless somebody is sending an HTTP method that's like associated with creating stuff like post or patch. Post particularly. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say, hey, redirect to not new chat path, but chat path, and then pass it either the first chat, because I don't have multiple users yet, or, yeah, here we go, chat.create. And I'm going to use chat create bang, so it explodes if it fails to create the chat. Now I'm going to refresh. And now, uninitialized, constant, chat's controller chat. All right, how much time you got? Just 27 minutes. We're gonna go into the lightning round of something we shouldn't rush, to be honest. We'll see how far we get. This is worth the time. Worth taking the time. So there's not a thing called chat. I could just do right here. It'd be like, hey, yo, class chat end. And it would be like, hey, okay, that's great. You know, we would get through that error. But then it would be like, I don't know what the first method is. And I could write a fake first method, but like, come on. Who's got the time? Now I'm going to actually use the only, so Rails has all these generators. That's what G stands for. You can say generate. I don't know. Maybe I've never done this. I'm going to say create chats and messages. Cool. The reason I generate these as opposed to everything else is like this timestamp is meaningful. It runs them in order based on those timestamps. And I'm going to create each migration that you get here. This is I did not do a good job explaining because now I'm kind of feeling rushed because I'm like, it's already been half an hour. It's been 28 minutes. Calm down, Justin. All right. Create chats and messages. This is a file that Rails has generated for me called a migration. It allows me to specify DDL, data definition language stuff that should go into my database schema. And it does it in a way that is knowable in terms of how, from the database's perspective. It'll keep a record of which migrations have been run, have they all been run, and if so, then the database schema is considered to be in a good state. You can do all kinds of monkey shenanigans in here. Here, I'm just going to define what I want the chats table to look like and the messages. So you can see it was trying to guess before what I wanted to call it. And chats and messages doesn't sound like a great table name. I'm going to create two of them in here. First chats and then messages. You'll see this is also a DSL, a domain-specific language. I'm creating a chat, creating a table called chats. I'm passing it a block, and then idiomatically, conventionally, we call the block argument to this method t. So I'm going to say t.timestamps. Timestamps are auto-generating created at and updated at. And those two columns just help you kind of keep track of when things got created or updated. Doesn't really cost very much to keep them. I've definitely seen cases of regretting not putting them, so I just habitually put them on everything. All right. ID is handled for us. We don't have to worry about ID that's built in. What is on a chat? Is anything on a chat? Maybe they'll be named eventually. Maybe they'll belong to users eventually, but this is fine. I just need them to exist because they're going to be the thing that holds on to our messages. Here, the message is going to have a string named, I guess, text. And it's not going to be nullable. Like, it doesn't make sense to have a null string. Doesn't need, but having a default doesn't make sense either. It's going to be set explicitly in each case. Seems fine. It's also going to references a chat. Look at that. So thanks, GitHub Copilot. Somebody in the comments called this spicy autocomplete is how I use Copilot, which seems valid. So every now and then it does what I want. So referencing a chat, that's going to create a column called chat ID, which is a big int by default in Postgres. Null is false, so it doesn't make sense to have a message without a chat. I'll leave it at that for now. Foreign key true, meaning if the chat gets deleted that this belongs to, the database will raise error and say, hey, you've got messages belonging to that chat. We don't want to leave orphaned messages rows for chats that don't exist anymore. In the interest of expediency, another way to set up a foreign key is on delete. And I can say cascade, meaning if you delete the chat that owns a message to which that message belongs, delete the message as well. And that seems appropriate. I'm not likely to get in the case of deleting chats and needing that error to go and delete the messages first. And here we are. So I think that's probably good enough. We could have something like an index, right? Like integer index. That gets us into a whole hairy business of like trying to keep track of like the order that messages happen, and then to also keep track of incrementing that index. You could use a sequence for at the database level. That's kind of complicated. And if you've got multiple servers or doing things at the same time, so you're not really guaranteed that it's going to come in order. There are gems for this. In fact, one of the most famous, longest lasting gems is Axis List. There it goes, Google search. Been around forever. I think it might have been built into Rails in the 1.x days. But yeah, it's got a whole bunch of features for this kind of thing. Or, you could just use created at and sort ascending. So let's do that. All right, so we're going to run migrations again. I should have a schema RB file. Again, this is auto-generated, so deleting this comment will do me nothing. You can see that the schema is currently empty. If this succeeds, and it did, now you can see all the stuff that just got created. I've got chats with timestamps. I've got messages. This is all, again, articulated in the DSL, which might be surprising. You can format, and maybe you should, depending on the complexity of your database wizardry. You can format this dump as Ruby or as pure SQL. If you do pure SQL, though, it's not going to be portable to other database engines. Here, you might use SQLite locally and then Postgres in production, or mix and match. In general, right now, it's so cheap to run a database server. It makes sense to run the same thing as in production. It's way more bulletproof. But anyway, this DSL will reliably recreate it in a different database engine if you so choose. Okay, so messages has a chat ID, not nullable. Text, not nullable. Created at, not nullable. Chat ID. Tons of other stuff we want to track. For example, like how many tokens are consumed on each request. We definitely have to track that because it's going to have to be some kind of quota system. But for now, this is good enough. That's about it. Okay. I got carried away. Refresh. Uninitialized constant chats controller chats. I got myself into trouble here. So I deleted the thing, but then the reloader got confused because I didn't put the thing in the right place. All that to say, if you're going to go define classes, you want to do it in the way that Rails expects. So it tried to reload chats controller chat, but then I deleted it, but then it didn't exist. So what it wants to do is say uninitialized constant. Oh, wait, no. Boy. I was wrong. I spoke out of turn, jumped the gun. It just went back to saying that there's no such thing called a chat. If I want to make a thing called a chat, I would add that to my models. Now, I could have just generated all this resource, but like there's not that much going on here. I'm just going to say chat.rb, class chat. Forget everything I said about how the autoloader works. Basically, it's going where it looks, just like how it looked in the controller, is it's going to look by default in models and chat, and that's it. And if I define it like this, then I get a new error message, right? Change the message, make it pass. I'm so embarrassed. Speaking out of turn. It's hard speaking confidently all the time as if you know what you're talking about when you have no idea. Please don't call me out. If you want to praise me, do that in the YouTube comment. If you want to call me out, remember, let's@playstupid.games. That's what we're here for. Application record is a thing in our code. It comes by default. It's basically like this interstitial fluid creating a place for us to put stuff in a superclass across all of our models. So if all of our models need to behave the same way, all share the same validation, we can put it there instead of opening up active record base, which is the real granddaddy class, and monkey patching it. You might have remembered that when you saw chat's controller with the application controller, same pattern. Application controller is actually empty by default, but like stuff, you can imagine stuff that you'd want in your application controller, like making sure that you're logged in, maybe a before action filter that makes sure people are logged in by default, or maybe an error handler, an exception handler to handle those in a certain way, especially for API routes, so that it comes back as JSON. Anyway, we got our chat. Now we have changed the message to there's no action named show in the chat's controller, so let's go back over there. I say def show and reload. No template for show. In fact, we don't need a template for index anymore because there's no way, if you look at that index implementation as it exists, for it to need one. So we can just rename index.html to show.html, and here we are, we're back working again. Now what I want to do is I want to like draw a form for you to create a message. Again, thinking outside in, I'm not going to try to like jump the gun like I have been doing. Let's say create a form. We're going to use this magical percent equals means whatever the expression inside these little magical, not magical, but kind of magical, ERB tags does. The equal sign means render that into the string. We do want to render this because we're asking Rails, render me a form, use the instance variable chats messages, and then build me a new message. So off that message association, build a new one, and use that to build a form, and then end the model. Refresh. No method error. Undefined method messages for nil class. All right, so now we got a problem. Chat is nil. So I reference an instance variable typified by an @ symbol, and I could say, sure, I could say chat.find params ID. In fact, that is exactly what I will do because that's what it is wanting to do. And you can even see it's in the database. Chat ID 1 created. That's pretty cool, right? So it found the chat, but there's still no method on it named messages. I refresh. I can see that chat ID doesn't change. That means that this OR statement is successfully working. Again, I'm trying to get all the feedback I can from my system as quickly as possible and just telling you the things I'm observing. I can say, hey, you have many messages. Dependent destroy. I mean, I could say that. I don't plan on destroying it. When I have that feature, maybe I will. Rails couldn't find a valid model for message association. Please provide the class name or, make it real. So here we're going to create now models.message.rb. We're going to say class message, extend from application record. No, not application record. And see what the message does. Undefined method, messages path. All right, so there's no such thing as a messages path. There isn't a nested route. I did make the nested route. I don't remember how this works. I can define form with and then pass it a model. I can also pass it a path or a URL. It feels to me kind of like this should just work. So if I run another command we should all know is bin Rails routes. Bin Rails routes. Is this a rake command actually? Not that it matters. Nope, it's a Rails command. They're a perfect example of how that's sort of doesn't make a ton of sense. All right, so looking at this, right? New chat message, edit chat message, chat message. Sure, so we can say that the form goes to new chat message. That feels strange to me. Nested resource form path Rails. Well, form 4 is what form with was called. Yada yada. Goes all the way down. It doesn't actually use form with. Oh, form with and then an array of the two things? Yikes. I guess it needs to be told somehow. Let's see if that works. I've never seen this. We're both learning. We're just here to learn. I'm here to have a good time. You're maybe here to have, I don't know. See what happens. Look at that. So one way, obviously nothing's being rendered right now, but one way to check this out. So let's look at our inspector. It made the form. And it says method is post, and it's got the correct action. Look at, I learned something today. Thanks, Google. All right. So I'm going to now, oh, spicy autocomplete. Look at you. Except you got the name of the column wrong. So if I accept that and then refresh the page, it's going to be like, well, it's actually not going to fail, but we know that this is actually called text. So there's a text field named text and submit, refresh. Now with 10% more correctness. I look here. This authenticity token is really scary looking. What it's doing is it's preventing cross-server CSRF, cross-server request forgery. Look it up. I'm at 42 minutes. I gotta go. I got places to be. All right. Input, text, messages, text. All right. It's not telling me what the chat message is yet, but that'll probably come along for the ride now that I got the route right. So that's good. Okay. So let's try. Now you can see this is all unstyled because we're using Tailwind, but we haven't styled anything yet. IJ, that's a good message. This is a button. It doesn't look like a button. What happened? I don't know. It looks like it failed. In fact, here we got a page reload. If I look at my error messages over my other terminal, you can see this is my least favorite thing about the default settings for Turbo. Where's the error? Can't find. Nope, that's a different error. Routing error. Uninitialized constant message control. That got swallowed because Turbo is trying to replace that little part of the page that has the form. It's not trying to spare us the big flash of the whole page. If I click this, you'll see a flash happen right here, and that's going to be a failed fetch request. Oh, messages came and went. And now I got to go and I got to dig through here. So this is not ergonomic. I have to go and dig in. I'm going to close all flusters and close controllers, messages, controller. I'm under the gun here. I got 15 minutes and I got to bail. Class, messages, controller. Your typing speed and your productivity are not as related as you might think. Okay. I guess I can refresh this page and then just, again, be frustrated that my feedback is all the way down here. Say live. Action create couldn't be found. Okay, def create and fooberry. Okay, they did an error. So here we go. What did I get? I got 204 no content, which basically means that you didn't do anything, didn't give a response. And as you can see, nothing really changed here. It's not exactly what we want to happen. So let's create a message. We're going to start by grabbing... Oh, you know what? If you want to know what your params are, you could set up a debugger, and we'll cover debuggering. It's debuggering. It's like a little moment that we just had. I hope. If you're still here, I'm going to check my drop-off rates. Make sure you're still here. If you're just debugging, you could set all that up and like do like a binding.irb and see that. It's a little bit of a pain when you're using that bin dev thing. If you are using Foreman, as is the default with bin dev, there's another tool called Overmind, which is really nice. And it allows you to deal with standard in as well as standard out, because by default, it's not going to accept standard in correctly. So my wonderful colleague, Ali Ibrahim, wrote a great blog post about how to use Overmind as an alternative to Foreman. Well, I have not done that yet. So doing this is going to require setting up VS Code Debugger, which I've created another video. That's either me doing a dance or I've successfully figured out how YouTube cards work. Another video about VS Code Debugger. Okay, so instead of all that, I want to see what the params look like. I want to know if like the chat ID is on params ID or if it's under like messages, chat ID. I don't know for sure. So I'm just going to raise. I always raise hell. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to raise hell by doing this. Boom shakalaka. All right, runtime error. Raised hell. Sure. But now I've got a couple things at my disposal. One of them is I have the web console, which is actually quite reliable now compared to how it used to be. I can type into it. I can say, hey, parmas. I'm here. And it prints that out. But if you looked, you actually see you also actually have this here. So you actually, not params ID, sorry, spicy Copilot, but rather chat ID 1, and then message has just its parameters. So here I could say, all right, params chat ID. This is a hash with indifferent access, which is a fancy method, fancy class that allows you to access its values using keys that are either symbols or strings. I could say chat ID like this, or I could say chat ID like this. Same thing from the perspective of accessing that hash using the subscript operator, which is just a fancy way to say square brackets. All right, I'm going to say chat find by these IDs. Now, once we have users, this would be an unsafe way to pull back our chats. So keep that in mind. We want to grab them off of the user and make sure somebody doesn't go see somebody else's chats. There's one good argument for starting with a user model, but hey, I've only got like 10 minutes. Chat, find, params. Okay. Once I've found it, then I want to look at that. I do indeed want to create based on my messages params. And I don't know. I usually use create bang for everything except for when I'm in a controller. When I'm in a controller, I want to know about the negative case, the failure case. So here, messages params versus just saying params. Yeah, all right, that's kind of correct. I could say require a message, or I could just say message if I know it's going to be there. I don't know that it matters a whole lot. It probably just gives you a better error message if you say params.require. Because otherwise it's just going to be a nil error. Sure, we'll do it. I'm here to try new things. Params.require, except again, it really wants us to call it the message body. Now GitHub Copilot has made me self-conscious about the choice of that column name. All right, so that's a lot of stuff. This is getting to be a long line. Because I could say success. If success. We're going to clean this up later. Okay, cool. Now here we're cooking with gas. Redirect to the chat. Otherwise, redirect to the chat with an alert. That seems strange. I was just going to say render new. Although we're in that controller. You know what? For now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to create bang. We're going to assume everything goes great. We'll come back and think about exception handling at a later date. Redirect to chat path for the params ID. That's good enough for me. No, that's good. All right. Whoopsie. Localhost 3000 goes our first chat. La 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 la. Create message. Forgot to open the web inspector. Get that the right side of the screen. Okay, so I can see that this happened. I didn't have it open, so I didn't save all my parameters. Return to the 1 again. Request. Response found. Strange. 32 found. Oh, I guess it's found the chat because I got redirected from chats 1 messages. Sure. Oh, well, you can see like the messages aren't here yet because I'm not rendering them yet. So let's go render them. We're going to say Now this is a ERB tag without the equals because we're just using it to loop over stuff. We're going to say chat messages each, do message, and then end. And we'll write out just a simple little div. There we go. There is no Copilot really can get carried away thinking that you built stuff that you haven't built yet. I'm still not entirely sure it saved me any time. Okay, cool. So I can see our messages are here, and I can say, yo, schmangela. And there it is. And now, all of a sudden, I like Turbo because look how nice it is when the page doesn't refresh the whole time, because all it's doing under the covers is posting to that messages route, getting a response back, and then only replacing the form, because that's where all the action is, literally the form action. All right, cool. I think that's a good place to call it. Let's go ahead and commit what we got. The fact that we're taking a long time, the fact that we're chewing the cud, that we're not going to get everything done in an hour. Sure, could I go faster? Yeah, I could go faster. Will I go faster? I would honestly, I would like to go faster. But you know what? If we have time to explain stuff, talk through what we're thinking as we go, that's time well spent. You can always fast forward me. Please don't. I can tell. I don't know that I have the metrics, but like I can feel it. All right, do stuff. I always, I'm not a big git commit person in terms of messages. I think future me will not necessarily think very hard about what I chose to commit or the message I gave it, because future me always thinks past me was an idiot. You be the judge. All right, so once again, thank you for your time. Had a lot of fun. Hope you have a great evening or whenever you consume this content. And yeah, write me an email at lets@playstupid.games, which is a complicated email address for such a simple television program on the YouTubes. Have a great time, and I will see you when I see you.